You might have noticed a theme in the gaming world. Most games don't live up to their expectations on release. Well, at least they have been released. I've had a little experience selling stuff before, and in order to sell something, you have to make the product seem better than it really is. This concept applies to everything. Ever wonder why movie trailers basically show the whole movie in the trailer itself? They have to, or else no one would really get invested. It's the same principle with games. There are countless empty promises and setbacks by game companies. What is even worse is that they know this and they take advantage of our monkey brains. We enable these companies to ramp up expectations just to be let down when we find out the game is half the size of what they promised. But at the same time, without these promises, there would be no hype for the game. And yes, obviously there are games that match or exceed what is expected of it, but I'd argue that's not the norm anymore. Let me preface this video by saying that you probably will not agree with me on everything, but that's the point. When talking about expectations, everyone expects the game to be at a certain level. That could be graphics, story, characters, gameplay, anything and everything inside the game. No matter how the game turns out though, some people will love it and some people will hate it. It could be baseless tribal war stuff like PlayStation versus Xbox, or something as simple as the water graphics in Pokemon Arceus. It reminds me of politics. Republican, Democrat, no matter what a politician says or does, people will hate them, and others will love them. But sometimes games or people benefit from the doubt. And that's the reason why people love an underdog. When there are little to no expectations of something, unless the thing is really bad, then it should exceed expectations. Typically exceeding them will result in a nice feeling of surprise, like buying a CSGO case and pulling a knife. Before I go any further, I have to explain what I mean by expectations. Expectations, by the dictionary definition, is the act of expecting.
I thank you for your attention.
On a real note, expecting is just thinking or believing something will happen. That could range from a game flopping like Cyberpunk and expecting CD Projekt Red to fix it, or hoping that Silksong will be the best game ever. What were you expecting when you clicked on this video? Silksong news? Something about your favorite game? What happens when I don't do that? You might be annoyed or have already left. But what if you stick around and enjoy the video? Will you then watch more of my videos? Maybe subscribe? I don't know, I'm no fortune teller. Anyways, the way I look at expectations is this. The more you expect something to happen, the more likely you are to be disappointed. And the less expectations you have, the less you will be disappointed. I'm sure most people have realized this before, but not many people actually apply this to their lives. It can be applied to everything, not just about video games. And I'd beckon there'd be a lot less arguing on Twitter if more people were like this. But we're humans, and as humans, we usually think with emotions. Even if you know that you shouldn't expect much out of something or someone, that form of logic probably won't work, unless you've been fooled by it more than once. In terms of the consumer, meaning you, there isn't really a way to quantify expectations. Sure, you could review something on a scale of 1 to 10, but all that provides is one person's experience of something, and that same experience was probably swayed somehow, some way, by what they were expecting in the first place. Expectations come down to individual people, each with their own thoughts and ideas of something. Like I said earlier, no matter what the product, someone will find a way to get pissed off at it. That being said, companies have a different way of looking at expectations, with a way to quantify it. Game devs may view this differently, but the overall company finds success in making money. Typically, it's how many sales a game has or how many players spend money in their games. They have targets that are meant to be hit.
Unbelievable! 10!
I'm not here to talk about the company side of things. I want to talk about games and how their expectations shift public opinion about them. There are 4 games I want to talk about, the first one being Silksong. Now, the game hasn't even come out yet, and no one knows if it ever will, especially with the latest news regarding Unity. Nevertheless, it is a perfect example of what I want to talk about. Team Cherry, the guys behind Hollow Knight, have been working on this game for a long time. With so much time having passed, and the starved people that are Hollow Knight fans, the game is expected to be the best game of all time. Honestly, how the game ends up turning out doesn't matter to me in this case. No matter how good the game might be, I doubt it can live up to the hype it's garnered over the years. The problem is, Team Cherry must have massive pressure on their shoulders to perfect this game. It is like the self-eating snake Ouroboros. The more people demand the game, the longer it will take. These expectations aren't baseless though, as Hollow Knight is a masterpiece. I can't really put what I expect out of the game into words, but I am expecting something similar to Hollow Knight, with the gameplay a little more fleshed out. and the trailers prove this concept. But I doubt how I envision it is how it'll actually be. I could rattle off some theorized spells or some cool movement, but I'd rather not think about it too much. If I get too invested now and try to imagine the game how I want it, the actual game may not live up to that. In that case, the game will have failed for me. Again, it hasn't come out and no one knows when it will come out. But replace the name Silksong with any other game that hasn't been released yet and the same result will happen. Looking at the broader picture of Silksong's expectations, the community is rabid for any updates. This leads to memes, fan theories, and misinformation. Like I said earlier, the longer the wait is, the more fans expect, and the more expectations will result in the higher likelihood the game not surmounting them. Silksong is a little bit of a different beast compared to most games that would be in the same situation. I think even if the game is shit, fans will just be happy the game is even out. Then over time, critiques about the game will be made. But either way, I don't envision it failing. Of course, the game needs to actually come out first. A game that should have never been released, and one that failed miserably, was Jump Force. You might have thought I was going to sit here and talk about Cyberpunk. I hinted at it, mentioned how their company fixed the game, and it would be a perfect example. Well, I'm going to assume that you probably know the story if you're here watching this video. I'm not going to take the lazy route and just rehash the failed release of Cyberpunk. There are countless other videos on that. Anyways, you might have forgotten that Jump Force even existed, because I did. I wouldn't have remembered it at all if it weren't for doing some research. But alas, here we are in 2023 talking about Jump Force. On the surface, the game is just primed to be successful. Some of the biggest anime characters ever in a huge fighting game, the excitement for the game was massive. Now, you can't even buy it anymore. It has been a while since then, so I don't really remember what my expectations of it were. But if I had to guess, I expected some sort of a subspace emissary type story, and while Jump Force attempted to do that, it wasn't great. And I'm not the only one who thought that. For a game with such potential, Jump Force is a colossal blunder and a rushed mess. The visuals and art style is atrocious, the gameplay lacks any kind of depth, and the animations are horrific. Overall, Jump Force is a huge disappointment. And that was not the only bad review. Despite the bad story, that wasn't the main reason why people bought the game. It was marketed as a clash of anime worlds, where you could fight against some of the most popular characters ever. It was expected that it was going to be like a Super Smash Bros. Kind of game. The problem is, anything compared to Super Smash Bros. Is probably going to flop. Just look at Nickelodeon All-Stars or even Multiverse. Both have great IP, but none of that makes sense in the format. And sure, Jump Force plays nothing like Smash Bros., and it wasn't really aiming to be the same thing. But that's at least what I was hoping for. I've seen a lot of anime, but the launch characters left me with some weird choices. It came out in 2019, so popular shows then were My Hero Academia and Black Clover. You'd expect there to be more than one character from that. Nope, you're wrong. All they had were Deku and Asta. Eventually there were DLC that did add more, but no one cared since the game was already dead. But at launch, they did add characters from City Hunter and Saint Seiya.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Again, I've seen a lot of anime, and I've literally never heard of these shows before. That might be because they were both made before I was even born. And that's the thing, the game didn't have any clear direction. It didn't know if it should market itself to the older anime fans or the new ones. And you know how I mentioned that you can't make everyone happy? Well, at least picking one side can leave some people happy. Picking no sides leaves everyone unhappy. All this is to say that the game did not come close to whatever people were expecting. I couldn't find the exact numbers, but it seemed like the game did at least sell okay. But definitely not good enough considering Bandai Namco took it off digital stores and shut the buggy servers down. It is a shame that it didn't pan out the way people hoped it would, as it would have been an amazing game for a long time. But you can't cry over spilled milk. The feeling of being let down is the worst, but the feeling of being surprised by a great game is the best. And that is exactly what Neon White gave to me. For those of you who have never heard of this game before, it came out in 2022 and almost won Indie Game of the Year. The basic concept is that you have to speedrun levels and kill enemies along the way. There are a couple of different weapons you can use, and the goal is to go as fast as you can. It is a speedrunner's dream. I don't recall what made me want to try it, but I'm glad I did. I think it might have been the cool art design and description. I went into it not knowing what to expect, and didn't really have high hopes for it. But as I kept playing, it hooked me very quickly. I could care less about the story. The game was made to speedrun, not sit back and read a visual novel. The game is fun and has unlimited replay value. Plus the difficulty can be as hard as you want. The levels themselves aren't that tough to beat, some may take a couple attempts to complete, but what makes it challenging is the speed. The game does not let you advance without achieving a certain time. As you get better and better, the game will even show you shortcuts. I grinded through it, feeling elated the whole time. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would find such an enjoyable game pretty randomly. If I went into Neon White with high expectations, I may have been a little let down by the story or even the gameplay. But I didn't, and that made the game one of my favorites. It doesn't take very long to beat, and I've done so twice. Each level is tailored towards a certain type of movement, so some are easily replayable to get a top time. Everything is simple and easy to learn, with some nuances to add some spice. There are different weapons you use throughout your journey, and each having a corresponding movement. My favorite has to be the RPG, as you can swing through the levels like Spider-Man. Going into a video game with no expectations is a good way to experience it, but without them, you would never know what you want to actually play. That is why I think Neon White was the perfect storm for me. I'm sure you've had some games where that also happened, just mindlessly looking for something new to try and it completely smashes whatever you thought of while buying it. This is the advantage that smaller games have. I'm not saying it's easier to please the player in this case, but it's definitely more doable than a big game. AAA games have become notorious with garbage, empty promises, and greed. Honestly, it's deserved, but not for all games. If you keep your expectations low, you will be happy with the product as long as it's playable. Getting too excited for a new game is a recipe for disappointment. I can pick a lot of different games and franchises to talk about here, but one that sticks out to me is Pokemon. I'm a sucker for Pokemon games. I don't know if it stemmed from my nostalgia for it, or I just enjoy them, but I can't resist buying them, and I also can't help but get excited for it. Most of the time I buy them, I beat them and go along my merry way. They never disappoint me, but they also don't leave a lasting impression anymore. They are exactly as expected, though 2 recent games bucked this trend. The first one was Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. They were both disasters that I hated. I must only remember Platinum with the third, better version of the original 3, but my lord was this dreadful. The games were true remasters, except for the underground area and the EXP share, with one of those ruining the game. I could go on and on about how bad this experience was, especially with how excited I was for it, but I don't need to be any more of a Debbie Downer than I already am. The reason why I can move past this game was the release of Pokemon Arceus about a month later. This was Pokemon's first open world experience, so no one really knew what to expect. People assumed it would be like the Wild area in Sword and Shield. It was based in an ancient Sinnoh where Diamond and Pearl took place, though that didn't really tell us anything. When the trailer for it was first shown, there were mixed reviews about the game. Some were complaining about the trees or worried about the frame drops. Others were thinking it had the potential to be the best Pokemon game ever. It was stated that it wasn't going to be like the other mainline games with gym badges and the Elite Four, so there was speculation on what it could end up being. About a year after the trailer, the game finally came out, and it was mostly amazing. It felt like no other Pokemon game I ever played before. The goal of the game was to catch Pokemon with a couple battles spread throughout. That's what really surprised me, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it at first, but as I went through the game, I didn't mind it. In fact, I actually really liked the idea. It made me care about the Pokemon I was catching, which, prior to this, I only cared about making a super strong team. You may be wondering why I called it mostly amazing. Well, other than catching Pokemon, the game was cliche, buggy, and pretty much empty. The open world aspect was cool, but it wasn't pretty and there wasn't a lot to do. I'm not one to care about graphics, but the game was admittedly ugly. This is no thanks to the potato it ran on. The story wasn't great either, but let's be real here. Pokemon games aren't bought for their story. And I mean, every game has bugs nowadays, so I could look past them. For me personally, I thought the expectations for the game were dead on. Fun gameplay with some shit graphics. I thoroughly enjoyed playing it, which outweighed the ugliness. It did, however, raise expectations for their next Pokemon game, but we can talk about that another time. Most people don't really think about the impact their expectations have on their experiences. And even when they do, it usually doesn't change anything. Having no expectations takes the fun away, and too many expectations usually leaves a bad taste in your mouth. I'd argue finding a nice middle ground of expectations would benefit anyone. Just be a little skeptical about how things are marketed. Don't fall victim to the tricks companies play in order to get more sales. And specifically for video games, expect every single one of them to be shit. And you may finally find some fun in gaming again. Or you won't pull your hair out waiting for something to come out. And if you're still here, thank you for watching.